Lonely Monk Productions. You know, I don't know if y'all have heard Big Feelings by Willow yet, but yo!
That's my Jawn!
Hey, yo, displace the guilt and embrace the pleasure. You're tasting things that don't need to be measured.
What's good, friends and family, neighbors near and far? Welcome to an all-new episode of the Yo, That's My Jawn podcast. The podcast, website, brand, movement, way of life dedicated to the embrace and championing of your passions. I'm your host, Nate Runkle, a.k.a. Jawn Whitney, a.k.a. Nate 3.0, back at it again with yet another episode of the podcast. As always, I hope this podcast finds you all in good health and in good spirits. On today's episode, I am joined by Paul Myers of the Record Store Day podcast to talk about Saturday's upcoming Record Store Day, his career in music and journalism, and his pivotal role in the reason why one of the questions in the Jawntlet even exists. We talk about that and so much more, and that's coming up in a little bit. But first, hey, hi, how you doing? Thanks for all the warm notes about the Too Old, Too New podcast, and I really hope you enjoyed the first episode. It's a lot of fun to put that together with Bruce, and incredibly validating to be seen as a peer that he would even agree to do that show with me. You can find the Too Old, Too New music podcast wherever you get your podcasts from. I love having an outlet to be able to share and spotlight some of the music, new and old, that I've been into lately, so definitely check that out. You know, I've talked a bunch about my quest this year to take time to quote-unquote live with albums more in my ever-going attempt to navigate the constant stream of content being hurled at us. And I'll be completely honest with you, not only has it been a challenge, I don't know how successful I've been with it. Which isn't to say I haven't tried. There are a few albums that have kind of owned me so far this year that I have listened to, sometimes on repeat. You know, off the top of my head, the new Mannequin Pussy album is absolutely one of them. My guest this year, Craig Wedren, he dropped The Dream Dreaming, which I've probably listened to more than any other album in recent memory. Sean Lennon's got Asterisms. That Asterisms project is another one that I found so incredibly interesting that I can't believe more people aren't talking about it, though being an instrumental album, that really shouldn't surprise me. Speaking of instrumental albums, Philly's own Christian McBride dropped an album with Edgar Meyer called But Who's Gonna Play the Melody? That is for sure one of my favorites that's come out this year. What else? Oh, I'm obsessed with the new Carsey Blanton album, After the Revolution, and I actually got a chance to talk to her about it recently, and guys, that's going to be next week's episode, so keep an eye out for that. And I hear you. You might be saying, Nate, it's only April, and you just named a lot of albums. Sure. It is, but comparatively, not so much. Because as of the recording of this episode, I have listened to 156 new releases this year, completely. And that may sound like a chore, but I do it for you. Jokes aside, I recognize it's a lot, but the nature of this show and my desire to be well-versed in what's out there and worth paying attention to, I feel like it's necessary to take the time with the art and culture that people are putting out there. Artists spend a great deal of time creating their art, and I want to play my part to pick up what they're putting down, so to speak. And now, 4 months into the year, I think I've learned maybe more about myself than I have anything else. For one, I've learned that even if I love something, if there are more than 10 to 13 songs on the album, I start to lose focus. And that's less about the music and more about my ability to pay attention to things for a long period of time. You know, I've spent the entire duration of this show asking younger guests why they are so focused on creating EPs and not albums. And now, 5 years later, I get it. An EP is a perfect digestible size. You get in, you get out, and it's better to leave them wanting more than to outstay your welcome. You know, the other thing I've learned, and the main reason I bring all of this up today, is to share with you an idea of what I want an album to do in 2024. And it's simple. I just want an album to thrill and entertain me for the duration that I am engaged with it. And that might even just be for one sitting. And I'm okay with that. You know, I've been approaching new music like seeing a band on a festival stage. I'll sit and listen and enjoy. And maybe I'll look them up after and check out some more, but if I don't, it doesn't take away from the music in the moment. I'm guilty too often of trying to find an album's place in the culture, to think of where it ranks in a discography or what it says about the moment we're living in. Take Cowboy Carter, for instance. Beyonce created an incredible album full of incredible music, regardless of the discourse around it. And that isn't to say the discussions that it has provoked are discussions that should be avoided. All I'm saying is that I am personally trying to remove deciding something's place in history while I am listening to it. I don't need to know, is this a lasting piece of art? What I need to know is, am I enjoying listening to it right now, in the moment? I just feel like internet culture has made us lose sight of discovering what is important in a quest to preordain or anoint things as important. We want to believe that everything we love is culturally relevant, but why? And for who? What do we have to prove? Can't we just like things / sometimes love things without hyperbolic comparisons to lasting art that came before it? I hope so. Because there's a lot of great art out there, and it doesn't have to measure up to Pet Sounds or Sgt. Pepper or Thriller or Dark Side of the Moon or anything like that, or even Cowboy Carter. All I'm saying is, you can just like the things you like. It's okay. My guest today is a songwriter, musician, author, and journalist. As a musician, he has created music with his band The Gravelberries, has written and performed alongside John Mormon in the act The Paul and John, and has released music under the moniker Flam. As a writer, he has written books on the Bare Naked Ladies, Long John Baldry, Todd Rundgren, and The Kids in the Hall. And he is currently working on a book about the late great comedy legend John Candy. You can hear him weekly as the host of the Record Store Day podcast, available wherever you get podcasts from. Folks, it is my honor to welcome to the show, Paul Myers. Ladies and gentlemen, I am joined today by the great Paul Myers. Paul, thank you for joining me on Yo, That's My Jawn.
Well, thanks for having me.
I'm super excited to talk to you. You're somebody who I've found incredibly interesting over the years, and I like to kick everything off by telling a little piece of connective tissue that we have together. And there's two. One is the very first time I interacted with you over one of the socials, I can't remember, there's so many of them now, was a bonding over the fact that we both edit our podcasts in GarageBand. Which I find is super rare because everybody makes fun of me they're like, come on, you got to use Pro Tools or da-da. And I'm like, I don't. GarageBand's perfectly fine.
No, it's basically simplified logic.
That's
in both senses of the word.
Yeah. And two, a friend of mine has repeatedly, shout out to Sean, made fun of me because I was trying to go to San Francisco Sketch Fest this year to catch all of the state and Kids in the Hall shows and didn't go. And he said that he ran into you and had multiple conversations with you.
Oh, I think I know who you mean. Yeah.
So
yeah. That was outside the Great Star Theater. I remember. Yeah. I think, yeah.
So there's our two connective pieces. But again, thank you for doing this. I always like to start things off just kind of in the Wayback Machine. So tell everybody about where you grew up.
Well, I grew up in Toronto, Ontario, Canada, and I was living in the suburbs of Toronto, and just like any Canadian kid, I liked hockey, and but I was also a huge fan of the Beatles, and so that got me interested in music, and then I became a guitar player and started playing in basement bands, and then eventually some professional bands, by which I mean we still had day jobs, but we played professional shows. And then a lot of things happened. I started learning how to write, and then I write songs, but I would also learn how to write features and things like that, like short story, periodical stuff for magazines and newspapers. Got really encouraged by that, especially at a time when the music business was really slowing down for me and feeling a little depressing. I started getting published, and I was like, oh, well, there's no shame in having a second career, or maybe even having that be your main career. So that's what happened. Longest story shortest is, in my peer group, among them were a band called the Bare Naked Ladies, and they were just about to have their biggest American break, which was the album that had 1 week on it. And they had been together for 10 years, and they wanted to sort of have a story a book that explained who they were, like an autobiography, but they didn't want to. There's 5 of them, so they didn't want one of them to write it. So they all knew me, and they knew I'd become a writer. So they thought, you were there, you write the story. So I got this gig, and I wrote a book called Public Stunts and Private Stories. And it was basically their autobiography written by their friend. And it got published on both sides of the Canadian-US border. Actually, Simon & Schuster had an imprint that published it in the States, which was kind of exciting. And that kind of got me thinking, wait a minute, I can do this. So, and then I've written 4 books since. So that's cool. And I do features for things. And, I mean, I'm telling you my whole life story here. So, but then, and then, big detail is in the 97, I moved out of Toronto, and my wife had a job in Northern California, San Francisco area. So we moved to San Francisco. Then we, for a while, moved back to Canada, but the west coast of Canada. We lived in Vancouver for a while. And then I got into radio in Vancouver and television a little bit, and still writing the whole time. And then something happened where we decided it would be good to come back to the Bay Area. And here we are. We're still in the Bay Area. So we live in the East Bay, across from above Oakland, above Berkeley,
It's killer. And that's like one of the things, and one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you is because I a very smaller frame, much less successfully, find myself kind of in the same thing where, I had a very long period of time where I was trying to do music. Like that was my focus. But then I started like kind of pivoting to, writing and this podcast and kind of video creation and just stuff like that. So like kind of keeping my hands, but in my heart I still kind of see myself as a musician. Do you feel the same way? Like if I
am still a musician, and so I skipped a detail there, which was I put out a band in Toronto. I had a band called the Gravelberries, which was really my songs, and I was the leader. And we put out a CD that it did okay in the indie sort of, and especially in Canada, got a lot of radio play. But, we toured a couple of times in Canada. But when I got down here, I was more or less a solo artist. But a good friend of mine is a guitar player named Jawn Moorman. And Jawn Moorman is a great guitar player and a great songwriter. And we, almost as a kind of club, we decided that since we both led our own bands and we were both guitar players who wrote songs, we tried to write a bunch of songs. And over the next 10 years, we would write songs, and sometimes we'd throw the songs out, and sometimes we'd make demos. Then we decided in 2014 to make an album. He lived in the Inner Sunset district of San Francisco. So we made this album called Inner Sunset. It was credited to the Paul and John, because we wanted to call it Paul and John, but we thought it would sound like a Beatles tribute band. And then we thought it'd be funny to call a duo the. I don't know what we think is funny is just very specific to us, I think. But Inner Sunset I love because it was a great double meaning in a sense of it could be about internal exploration in your mind, but it's also physically a neighborhood in San Francisco. But that was we wrote both. Oh, we did a cool thing actually. He let me write all the lyrics, but we wrote the music together, and then he played the drums and guitar, and I played the guitar and bass. So, and then we both sang and layered the harmonies and everything like that. So it's a complete duo project. We played a few live shows, but mostly it was just me and him in the studio. And then, we've talked about doing another one over the years, but that was such a fun thing. We got crowdfunding for it. And so it really, it made me realize that even much after I'd stopped sort of pursuing band life, there's a way to make music. And I still make electronic music that I sell on my Bandcamp page. And there's no physical form for that stuff, but it's just this thing called Flam, which is kind of soundtrack music. It's some of it's ambient, some of it's like blippy bloopy synthesizer music, but it's all very personal to me. And so I've kept my hand in, and I just actually co-wrote some songs with this English songwriter named Phil Thornley, who is also a producer. He's worked with The Cure. He actually played bass and produced the song Love Cats for The Cure. And he's done a lot of cool things, and he's a great songwriter. And we were just chatting, and I sent him something I've been working on. He put it on his last, it was the B-side of a single, his last single in England. And then I've got a song that's actually on his new album that I co-wrote with him that's coming out called Hollywood as she might, Hollywood, and Phil Thornley. So like, I'm, still writing songs that are actually going to be heard by people. So it's kind of neat. So yeah, I've definitely kept my hand in.
That's incredible. It's great that you mentioned Jawn. He's actually in Philadelphia next week with Matthew Sweet. So
Oh yeah, and you should hear him with Matthew. He's so perfect for that band. Like, because Matthew has a tradition of having sort of freeform guitar players. Matthew's a friend of ours too, and Jawn totally brings it when he solos. Like, and he's got great rhythm guitar too. But when he goes off on a tangent, it's like so amazing because he's got kind of a jazz sensibility to rock and roll, which is rare, And I was always, whenever I played with Jawn, I always felt like I was just a strummer and he was like the guy. He was the guitar player, But that's. I'm glad he's playing with Matthew, and everyone should see that because they don't tour all the time. So that's cool.
Yeah, I'm hoping to make it. I have to clear something up. Busy man, you know how it goes.
You should tell us exactly what it is you have to clear up because we need to know the. No, I'm just kidding. Keep that to yourself.
It's just more podcast stuff, like as it always is. Back to the Gravelberries, though. Like one of the things. So in doing all of my research, and I don't want to pretend like I do these incredibly deep dives. Very surface, but I've been obsessed with the Gravelberries album in researching this because I'm a really big pop like power pop guy.
Oh, that's cool.
And so like that's just like that it's almost like it was I was predestined to enjoy this album or whatnot. But even kind of the Paul and John stuff kind of has like that strong power pop, and of course obviously Matthew's stuff is. What was your kind of connection to that? Like what was the first band that kind of hit for you and you were like, this is the sound I want to.
Are you talking about within power pop?
Yeah.
Oh well. For me, Badfinger was the one I put my like when I first started realizing it was not just Beatles. Like, so the Beatles were a huge influence. So obviously, if you want to trace it back, I mean, She Said, and I by the Beatles and stuff like that, or Day Trip, or Paperback Writer, and then also hearing the Who, like Pictures of Lily and stuff like that. But then I think it was Badfinger and the Raspberries, and the Raspberries go all the way. When I first heard that was life-changing. I mean, because they had the melodic chops and, Eric Carmen had the big bouffant and he could really sing, but the opening chords in that song are like as cool as anything that Keith Richards ever did. And it's, so the power pop needs both ends of the spectrum, right? It needs your power, but it needs your pop. It's like stacked harmonies, but 4-on-the-floor drumming and crunchy guitars and jangly guitars and all of it together. And I don't know why it always felt like sort of Caucasian soul music to me. There's something really evocative about it. And the Byrds were kind of, they would veer towards that in sort of the more faster end of their tempos. And so when I heard those two, like the Raspberries and stuff like that. And that was, and then over the years, there was a lot of different things. Like there was a guy in Canada who was on the radio all the time named Michel Pagliaro. And they just call him Pagliaro. And he had a song called Lovin' You Ain't Easy.
Okay.
And Lovin' You or Lovin' You Ain't So Easy is what some people saying. That song is such an incredible pop song. And that was on Canadian radio. So this was at the same time I'm hearing the Raspberries and I'm hearing Badfinger, No Matter What, and Baby Blue. And then what happens in the new wave came along, and all of a sudden there was a lot of bands that were, nobody necessarily called themselves power pop, but there was a lot of bands like 2020 and the Shoes and some of the DB stuff, and it was the same thing. It had all those components that I love. Blondie even veers into power pop. Cheap Trick has power pop elements, and believe it or not, Kiss. This is a huge discussion amongst power pop fans, but there is definitely the Paul Stanley end of Kiss is definitely respectful, if not participating in power pop.
Definitely.
They would be found, and if you rated power pop people, you would find Paul Stanley in there, and he'd be in the paddy wagon with them. So there.
Well, it's funny because like I've always said that like I think one of my earliest musical obsessions before I even really understood music was Kiss. And I think it was to the costumes because I was a kid. And like I have
Sure.
a picture of me at like 2 or 3 with a Kiss guitar with my tongue out like Gene Simmons, like that kind of thing. But you know, I completely agree that like to me, like I think the birthplace of my love of power pop comes from like early Kiss. Like just, you know, it's just the guitars are just a little crunchier than
Yeah.
than usual.
And what veers it towards metal is that they ever so often lean towards either lascivious sex or demonic evil. Like
Yeah.
Detroit Rock City is a menacing song. It's not the power pop often has a more of celebratory, you know. And by the way, years later, I heard Big Star, and then I realized that September Girls is definitely like a template, and Chris Bell's I Am the Cosmos. Like, but I didn't even know that stuff as a kid. Like that was happening already, but it was happening for rock critics and certain nerds. But I was a different kind of nerd. And then years later, I think, you know, I definitely got into it. Like guys like Matthew Sweet were talking about it. The Posies were talking about it. Jellyfish were talking about it, Big Star. And you know, and so suddenly we all knew Alex Chilton and Chris Bell like really well, like in their music. And so there was definitely that revival. And then when the Gravelberries got together, now the name you might know, but there was an episode of the Flintstones where Wilma makes a Gravelberry pie, and it's so good that Fred thinks he's going to sell. He wants Wilma to make pies to sell to Safeway, which was called Safestone. And so the idea is he get a supermarket distribution deal and everything would be great and they'd make $1 million, as Fred often is wont to think. And then what he doesn't realize is that the price that they're offering him for per pie is like 3 times more than what it costs to make it is 3 times less than what it costs us to make the pie. So they're actually losing money on the pies. And in a hilarious turn, Fred says, take it or leave it to Mr. Safestone, and ends up having to leave it and is selling pies by the side of the road. And I thought, well, there's an indie story. That's what most people do. They make too many copies of their record and they're forced to give them away. So we thought gravel, berry, you know, rough, sweet, power pop. I mean, it just seemed like the right name. And I'm a huge Flintstones devotee, clearly. You know, I have no organized religion in my life except perhaps the Flintstones. I've often described myself as a Hanna-Barbarian. But these are the jokes, people. Anyway, but I knew that it was the right name for my band because of that. There you go.
That's awesome.
Segment ended.
Did you was there a conscious effort to not IES the Gravelberries?
Yes, that was a 90s thing or late 80s thing. We decided that the thing to do is spell your name in a way that is your brand. So also it would frustrate the hell out of people. Mm-hmm. And I don't mind if people, you know, call us the Gravelberries with IES, but it is definitely YS and it is definitely wrong, but it is how we spell the name.
Well, the reason I mentioned that is because it's brilliant SEO now. Which was an SEO back then, but it works.
We knew we were ahead of the SEO. Yeah, that's all we talked about, that and music.
But on the power pop line, I always love to call it out and pat myself on the back when I do this. Watch this amazing pivot and tying it into the writing. You wrote the Todd Rundgren book. And Todd Rundgren is a local hero, obviously, to me. And you got to talk to a whole bunch of people in kind of building it up. And I heard you say that it was your play to get the Todd Rundgren into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. So first of all, thank you and success.
Yeah, I can't take credit for that. I mean, but I would say this, and I'll take the humble credit for this, which was, when I proposed a book about Todd Rundgren, who is in fact Upper Darby, Pennsylvania's finest son, and then their finest daughter later turned out to be Tina Fey. When I proposed this book, I remember saying he's not sung enough. Like he's undersung, and he produced Patti Smith. He produced XTC's Skylarking. He produced the New York Dolls' first album, and then later did another one with them. He produced Meatloaf's Bat Out of Hell. That album only exists because Todd put his own money into it. And then all these things. And then he's also this artist who made these incredibly experimental records, as well as some of the big pop hits like We Gotta Get You a Woman and I Saw the Light and Couldn't I Just Tell You? And a great proto power pop tune, by the way. Couldn't I Just Tell You? And so I remember thinking people need to be talking more about him. And then it would come up that he's not in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and I would say, yeah, I mean, what's that about? All the Todd fans kind of got around my book too, which was nice. They embraced it, and they also really helped use it as an excuse to their friends to say, like, read this book and you'll see what Todd Rundgren's done. Why isn't he in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame? Which famously Todd doesn't care about.
Right.
He didn't care at all. He saw the whole thing for a kind of what it is. And we can discuss that in another day. But eventually they basically through determination got him in. And he snubbed them too. He didn't show up. So which is like, again, I respect him more for not showing up at that point because he always said he didn't want it. But so my book helped, I think. But for me, it was a labor of love. I mean, you know, as I said, he had never had a true victory lap. I said this in the book. He'd never had a true victory lap on roads that he helped pave. You know, like the home recording revolution. Like a handful of people were doing records at their home studios. Stevie Wonder, maybe Paul McCartney and Pete Townsend. But really, like he was like churning out records that he engineered himself, you know, or later he would have an engineer because he's too busy playing. But, you know, and then there's the Utopia stuff, which is a whole other kind of progressive rock, slightly pop thing. And he just kept making, and he marched to the beat of his own drum. Like he would always do whatever he wanted and sometimes lose people. Like he would just say, I'm going to do this now. And people are like, oh, okay, come back when you're doing this, you know? And there's something very original about Todd Rundgren. He's not an easy guy to define. And I was happy that my book, which we should tell people, is called A Wizard, a True Star, Todd Rundgren in the Studio, because it's very clearly about him as a producer and self-producer as well. And it's been really embraced by people. Like musicians have it in their studios. Engineers show me pictures of it on their console. And a lot of people go, hey, you know, like sometimes they think it's a compliment to say, hey, I found this book somewhere, you know, a free library, and it's great. But that's fine because the words got to you. Then that helps. And it gave me a lot of confidence that if I believed in something and did it right, you know, people would eventually find it.
Yeah. Yeah. And like, he is somebody who's absolutely incredible. Like, I think my main connection to him is I'm a lifelong Hall & Oates fan.
Right on.
Because John Oates is from my hometown. All right. So like there's a sense of hometown pride, but also like this weird, incredible sense of like, I feel like much like Todd, I feel like John Oates himself is the undersung person of Hall & Oates, because like he's an incredible guitar player, he's even an incredible singer, and much like Todd, I feel like, you know, people just kind of overlook him and stuff like that. And I'm not just saying this because I really want him to come on the show, and I've been, any chance I get to mention, I will. But I'm just going to side tangent here real quick. I have met him one time, and I used to work for Sam Goody. And he came in and I was helping him around the store and all. And he started to leave and he turned around and he was like, oh, before I go, he's like, do you have the new Outcast CD? And I went, Andre and Big Boy Outcast? And he was like, yeah. And I was like, I do? And he was like, I'll take that. And so I sold John Oates Speaker Box of Love Below. And that's like, if I never get to talk to him, that's enough, to be honest.
That's great. That's great. Yeah. No, I was just gonna say, but John Oates is the thing people don't realize is that, you know, a song like Sarah Smile, you know, the harmonies are, those two guys met, like, you know, the story, they met at a shootout at I think it was Temple University, right? Yeah. And they were both there to see like two of the greatest soul groups of all time, and then they really did need each other to do what they did. And Daryl Hall, you know, God love him, great singer, great songwriter, and I think an underrated producer in his own right. You know, it's so hard for people to see John Oates underneath that, you know, and now, of course, their fractious current situation, which is just sad.
It is. It really is. It's like your parents getting divorced, you know? It's like it really is just like, man. Like the other thing I always like to shout out is are you familiar with the Handsome Boy Modeling School song that John Oates is on with Jamie Callum? Greatest
No,
Mistake.
I didn't know he did a song with them. No.
Yeah, it's phenomenal. It's one of my favorite songs of all time. And so anytime I get a chance to sing the praise of that. But another, tying it into underrated, and another thing that you have a connection to is I have been on a push since the very first season of this podcast that the one snub of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame that really, really offends me is the Monkees, because I think the Monkees are incredibly important and were so many musicians' first band and intro into music and stuff like that. And you had one of the last public interviews with Mike and Mickey at Sketchfest.
That's true. Were you there?
I wasn't. No,
but it was actually streamed for a while. I don't know if they're still doing it.
I can't find it. Yeah.
Sketchfest. It was like pay-per-view, but it was like back when there was the lockdown was meant that Sketchfest couldn't even be on anymore for a year. Maybe 2 years actually, and they to keep the festival going, they had a pay-per-view thing where they would just show the filmed, videotaped greatest hits of the previous festivals, and that I was happy about that. It was like a paywall thing, but at the same time, it was great to see. I will say it was one of the honors of my life to spend time with Mike and Mickey, and talk to them backstage, and it was kind of like out of body experience for me. Like I don't know how much I was present for some of it, because I was kind of like remembering, like the Monkees were a huge influence for me too. Like I mentioned the Beatles, and I remember getting into an argument with some kid in the schoolyard once because I said the Monkees were better than the Beatles for a week. You know, I went through a week where it was the Monkees were speaking to me more than the Beatles at that point, you know, and I regret that, but at the same time, I mean, I meant it. What I meant was that those songs by the Monkees, Last Train to Clarksville, anyway, and the Mike Nesmith songs on those, like the album Headquarters, I remember buying it on the same, I think it was bought for me in a birthday present, a Revolver, it might have been Revolver by the Beatles, and Monkees Headquarters. And they were kind of equal to me at the time. And then I would talk to people and they go, yeah, but you're kidding about the Monkees, right? And I'm like, and at a certain point, you kind of just get sick of arguing. You go, yeah, I mean, you know, I just mean I like them, you know, but I don't think they're great. And then you realize, oh my God, they really were great. And the comedy part too was they kind of did that Marx Brothers thing better than the Beatles in a weird way. Because maybe or in an American way, you know, it was a surreal TV show. And the fact that the music, and Mike talked about this, you know, that song Tapioca Tundra. Mm-hmm. He would go on, I saw his last show, his last LA show with Mickey at the Greek Theater in LA. I happened to be in LA and a friend actually got me in, which was great. And he made a speech about how I'm paraphrasing wildly here, but Mike made a speech on stage. He was kind of not that in shape. He was going, you know, everyone had a sense that if he wasn't going to die, he was definitely going to be retiring very soon. And he had to sort of walk slowly to the mic. But one of the things he said in a very heartfelt way, it was kind of like a famous baseball player speech. He said, you know, we started out as a fake band, but then it became real because of you, the fans, and then the big cheers. And then, you know, I'm still kind of choked up thinking about it and then they sing a song for Davy up in heaven, you know, and it's like, you realize, they manifested it because their connection and the music together, the whole thing was such a special moment that the cynical part of Hollywood and all those things, it couldn't kill the good part, which was that they really did create, and pop exists on records anyway. So if a band makes a great record, that's a real record, you know, and so we don't know the difference between, the fact that the Wrecking Crew played on so many of your favorite bands' records that they didn't play on. The Beach Boys didn't all play on Pet Sounds.
Yeah.
You know, so why isn't that considered like the Monkees? You know, like, I'm saying to support both of them. I'm not saying dissing one of them, you know.
Exactly. No, I go on the same thing, like, because like I'm like, okay, you want to say they didn't write their songs, but they did. Okay, they didn't write their hits. Okay, Elvis didn't write his hits. Are you going to deny Elvis? Oh, well, they were put together by the studio. Okay, well, the Sex Pistols were put together by Malcolm McLaren. Does that take away their impact? Like every single argument that anybody gives me is just a fallacy, and I know what it is, and it's because, and I forget who it was that said it. It might have even been Mickey, that people just find them not cool. But I think that's starting to turn. I feel like people. I feel like it's I feel like their time's coming.
I think that what I was saying about the Marx Brothers TV show aspect of it, the sort of wacky comedy. I think that I'm going to name drop here, but Don Was said to me once. What a name to pull out. No, because he produced Bare Naked Ladies, and I was interviewing him for the book, and I said, why do you think it is that it Was Not Was and the Bare Naked Ladies don't have as much credibility with certain journalists? And he said, because they have a sense of humor. He said, people go to see Keith Richards play, and they might have a job, and I'm paraphrasing again, but Don said, someone might be working at a 9-to-5 job that they hate, and they just figured they gave up their dreams of life. But the Rolling Stones show is their say 2 hours in which they can be eternal. And they want to spend it with someone who takes this seriously. And if they perceive them as not taking it seriously, which, by the way, I would argue, just because you have a sense of humor doesn't mean you don't take the thing seriously. Right. But his thing is, the perception is, I want a serious rock and roll show, and in that voice. And I think that is part of the reason why the Monkees weren't given the same critical mass, or it didn't feel as clean to say that they're a great rock and roll band.
Yeah, that makes sense. I just had a conversation with someone recently about pop music in general and why there's kind of a uncoolness or a disrespect of pop music. And I started to think that it is kind of, like you just said, taking it serious. There is a bit of an authenticity thing to it where, like, when it's considered manufactured, so if multiple songwriters or something like that, I think because music is so manipulative and so emotional to people, I feel like they feel like they're being taken advantage of if it's not a sincere feeling, right? So like, I think maybe that's part of it, but it doesn't make sense to me because I'm a music snob and I love it. You know what I mean?
I will say this too. There's a thing about cleverness, and the English have a phrase, or the British have a phrase, clever, clever. When something's clever, clever, it means it's too clever by half. and sometimes people write satirical lyrics, or they write wry lyrics, and there's a sense that they're emotionally distancing themselves and not facing the truth of what they're saying. And sometimes that is true. Sometimes you can be so clever that you fail to make an emotional connection, and then you're wondering why your band isn't popular. And it maybe, or only critics like your band because they're funny, and there is definitely that. I would argue that, though, for someone like Robin Hitchcock manages to be clever and emotionally direct at the same time, and also super intelligent. So even when he makes a joke, in quotes, a lot of times the joke is very arch and very dry, and so there's a way to be clever and there's a way to be funny. And there's just something that happens sometimes. And in the case of the Monkees, of course, it's like they were literally had a show with cartoon sound effects. Right. Like they're literally like boing, there was literally smash cuts and bang, guns that said bang. And like it was, until they did Head, which exploded the whole thing. But like, that's a whole other story, right? But that was them trying to kill the beast in their own way, the same way that I was just talking to I was just talking to De La Soul. What did I say? I was talking to De La Soul recently on my podcast, which is something we'll get to in a minute. But they did this album, De La Soul is Dead, right after their biggest album. The Daisy Age had like exploded, and they'd done 3 Feet High and Rising, and everyone loved them, and they were crossing over in a big mainstream way. So then the next album is De La Soul is Dead. Because they're trying to say, we're not all about funny things here. We're not just, cuddly, and so there's sometimes we have to sort of balance the image. Anyway, that's enough about all of that.
Yeah. I'm so glad you mentioned that De La interview, which was absolutely incredible. And I'm also insanely jealous of, because
it took a lot to pull that off, by the way. Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of rescheduling involved in that one.
I don't doubt it. I don't doubt it. But so you have the Record Store Day podcast. How did you're a writer and you do all this. So like making a music podcast to me makes sense. Like but how did it get connected to Record Store Day?
Well, it's a funny story. I've been looking, okay, when the podcast revolution started really hitting home, and I'm a big fan of Mark Maron. I'm a big fan of various other podcasts that were not about music, but and now I really love all these Beatle podcasts that I listen to. But that's a whole other story. I wanted to get in the space because I had been in radio in Vancouver. I spent a year on a commercial radio station where I had a talk show called the Paul Myers 1-2-3 show, and it was because my time slot was 1 to 3 in the daytime, so it was like a graveyard in a weird way. People would listen to the rebroadcast in their cars. By the way, that was the coolest thing. It was on at 1 in the morning as well, so bands coming home from gigs would hear me. That was kind of neat. But what it trained me on was hitting the mic, as I'm pointing to one now. I don't know if this is a visual podcast, but I'm pointing to a microphone. And it trained me to sort of, it actually got me addicted to the idea that it's fun to chat on the radio, which is now what we do on podcasts. And so I really wanted to get in the space, but a couple of things. I didn't want to spend my own money. And I didn't really know what to do, frankly. Yeah. And I was just thinking, I wonder if someone will hire me to be part of their podcast. And around this time, I had gotten involved writing liner notes for a Record Store Day release. I can't even remember which one right now. Michael Kurtz there is a great guy. And he just contacted me and he said, actually, it was so cool because he just sort of was like, he's really laid back. And I was in New York. He was in New York at the time. And he said, let's just have lunch. Let's just talk about stuff because I know you're going to do something. And I said, okay. And we didn't know what it was. And then at one point I said, hey, have you ever, no, he said, hey, I know you were talking about getting a podcast together. Have you ever thought of doing one for the Record Store Day people? And I didn't know at the time that Record Store Day is a company that all year works on special releases for Record Store Day with record companies and indie stores and and that it's kind of a guild. It's kind of it's like a guild or a trade union thing, a trade organization. And this is a all year job. Like we're talking about records that go into stores, and the stores are all members and they're all independent. So there's this beautiful circle back to my punk rock roots of even a store that sells mainstream records. If they're an independent record store, they're out there slogging it. And the vinyl was at that point wasn't, when we first started doing this about almost 4 years ago, we weren't necessarily, I mean, it wasn't as big as it is now. And it started growing. And I think to Michael's credit, having me come and do this podcast was kind of part of their vision of how do they make it more like, get the word out more often and constantly all through the year. And then Carrie Colleton, who works with Michael, is somebody, and one week, I think it was suggested that she come on and talk about something that she's doing. She's with the Department of Record Stores, which is the department, literally what it sounds like. And she's doing a lot of direct work with everybody and knows everybody. So I would have her on as kind of like you would have a weather person on, like, tell me what's going on the, or traffic, what's going on the 405 today, Carrie? And she would give me a report. And then it just became that we like to talk about stuff that is relevant to records and the musical news. And it gives me a chance to not be just, for one thing, I don't know what's going on in the Record Store Day business part. So it's great. It's like, bring the person in to tell me the story. And there's another side to it that I didn't even think of, which is podcasts are a lot, not to denigrate what we're doing right now, but there's a lot of dudes talking. And so having a constant presence of a female voice who knows her stuff, I mean, or it could be anybody, but the fact is she's an expert in this thing that we're doing. And it just helps break up the sound of like my voice, which is like, you can hear if I got no one to, I just ramble. But it's kind of a neat side thing we didn't even count on. Now we're just friends, so it's kind of cool. So there's that component. And so that's how I got it, the Record Store Day. And I actually record the product, and I edit it. I make the posters. She helps. She does a lot of bringing stuff to me, which is great. So she's kind of like the booker. I will sometimes go out of my way, like the Lemon Twigs are a band that I'm interested in and become friends with. And we're having them back when their record comes out, because the last time they came on was like early when I knew them, and now this new album is just amazing. So I bring that to the table, but at the same time, we're getting other interviews and now people are starting to come to us. So I have publicists saying, can you get this on or something like that? And actually, the De La Soul thing sort of happened in a way of, I think Carrie had suggested to them that maybe they'd want to come on, and then they kind of seized the moment and said, yeah, let's do that. And it was kind of a way for a lot of these artists to sort of also have a place to say how much they love Record Store Day and how much they love record stores,
Yeah.
So again, I don't give you short answers, do I? I'm sorry.
No, I love it. That's you're giving me gold. The I'm a vinyl guy, and always have been. And I got it from my dad. My dad was a vinyl obsessive, and I acquired all of his vinyl, and then my own and stuff like that. So when Record Store Day kind of started coming around, like that was like big for me, because like not only was I getting things that weren't available or sometimes ever released on vinyl, but also like I like the support of the independent music store, which is why I'm completely surprised and happy with. So I don't want this to come across as any other way, but completely surprised with the Taylor Swiftification of Record Store Day. Which is, for people who don't know, Taylor Swift has had what now 2 or 3 releases through Record Store Day that have and on the resale market are astronomical prices and stuff like that. But the thing that amazed me was last year was when the folklore sessions came out. The amount of people who I know have never stepped foot into an independent record store that not only went in and bought that album, but bought countless other albums that they never would have probably even picked up had it not been for that. That to me is a testament to how beautiful Record Store Day is.
Yeah, and let's be honest, Taylor Swift is somebody who is a whole new kind of mega artist, in that she's very much home run. She's very much things. It's top down for her. Like the vision of how she reaches her fans is about her. She hasn't lost contact with that thing. So she, being a big music fan, and that's that thing too that even Billie Eilish and Phineas have, which is respect the people who came before you, and also embrace what it is that you want to do. And the connection that they have to record stores is the same thing, because she's excited to be associated with record stores, because that's a place of, I was going to say a place of worship, but it is kind of like a place of worship. It's a place of special gathering where people meet, often have conversations about records. Often it's just to be exposed to records. And, first and foremost, it's a place to pick up records. And the fact that Taylor's people in Taylor knew to be involved with Record Store Day, and then the fans who might, like you said, they might have just only ever streamed these things before, they want to purchase something that's going to feel like a physical thing in their home, and that they're like, where would I get that in this day and age? Oh, there's record stores. So there's that thing that it's a beautiful symbiotic relationship, is what I'm saying. And I think, we were all very happy. I mean, she did a couple of special things for Record Store Day. She hasn't been on my show. I'm not too surprised, like there's a certain level of artists. I mean, when Jason Isbell and Amanda Shires were the Record Store Day ambassadors, they came on the show, and and I think, I mean, I've been trying to get Paramore, but they're super busy right now. They're the Record Store Day ambassadors this year, which is interesting because they're in a place where they've now taken over their own indie career.
Yeah.
After being on a major, and for them, it's an exciting time to be Record Store Day ambassador. They said something in a public statement about that, and it's just, I think, you could call it the Taylor Swiftification, but there's also a couple other things that happen that are not as widely talked about, that it's an excuse for a lot of labels that don't want to press more than 2,000 copies of something, or even in some cases 500 copies. They know that they will probably sell them on Record Store Day. So they make these special releases that have a limited range, but they might be like the board tapes or demo mixes of an album that has an appeal that isn't gonna like excite the boardroom at BMG.
Right.
Like they're not, what's their profit and loss on this? It's not worth it for us. But it's worth it for some smaller record label to put it out in a small way. Or Warner, frankly, will do this too. Warner through Rhino, they'll do things that are sort of limited, but they know that they can make a quality thing that becomes, and I dare say, artisanal. It's a small batch, handmade. And I want to say one more thing about those bootlegs. This year, Record Store Day did something, and again, I don't work directly for the offices of Record Store Day, but I work with them, and they have this thing called RSDMRKT, which they just started doing. RSDMRKT.com, which stands for Record Store Day Market. And what they decided to do there was, since indie stores have to order these records, in various cities, they might sell out, and then they become, sought after on the aftermarket, right? But now they have a kind of an agreement with each other, all the stores that participate in Record Store Day, that you go, instead of going to like those other sites, go to RSD MRKT first, and they are not going to bootleg them or jack the price up in a way that you can't get. They're just going to make sure that people who wanted that record, if there's any left over, you can get it from say you're in Philadelphia, if somewhere in Ohio or Oklahoma had 2 copies left, that you can get it from them. And then I haven't used the service yet because I think they just started doing it. But in principle, this is a great idea because not only is it beating the bootleggers, but it's also rewarding those indie stores who, they buy those records. Like so Record Store Day makes these releases available, and somebody has to front the money to make those things, and then the stores have to order them, so they have to pay for the stock. This is like a great way of saying you will sell through your stock. And that means next year, say there's a volume 1 of something, and the volume 1, if it sells out completely, there'll be a volume 2 probably, because they go, oh, there's a market for this. It might even resurrect certain people's careers, So there's, one of the things I want to get into, as I was talking to Michael about this, Kurtz, was that I keep thinking, I know stuff that should be resurrected. I think we're a few months or a year away from me actually having one where I curate and produce it, because I now know how this works and I've watched it work. And there's some great people in the field who do resurrection work. Pat Thomas and Andrew Sandoval and Bob Mayer did with the Replacements. Like these guys, these people know what they're doing, and they know how to get the masters right and all that. I'd love to work in that field, and I have endless respect for the people who spend the time tracing the original master tapes and listening to 600 takes of something to decide what's worth putting on a box set.
It's killer.
Yeah.
Does that mean we'll get a Record Store Day release of Bowl of Globes?
I actually think that they should do that.
I do too.
I don't know because it's never appeared in vinyl. Like Bowl of Globes by the Gravelberries was a CD only release. It's streaming right now on my Bandcamp, and you can actually pay what you can on that to buy. There's 3 bonus tracks that weren't on the original CD, but I would love a physical release because the artwork was done by a good friend of mine, a talented graphic artist named Antoine Moonin in Toronto, and he did such a great job. The bowl on the cover of Bowl of Globes is made by my wife's best friend Linda, who lives in Colorado, and I found the little globes there there's a patio lights that look like little lit up globes, and the name is an homage to a Globe of Frogs by Robin Hitchcock, and I told him that when he was on the show. But it's like there's a lot about that package that I would love to see 12 by 12, and maybe even a gatefold sleeve, dare I say.
Be killer. It would be killer. Is there any release this year that you're looking forward to?
Yeah, well, definitely the De La Soul live at Tramps, which I don't have the. I've heard MP3s of it, but I don't have the physical in my hand. I would love to see that. And there's a lot of great. There's a jazz compilation that I just discovered. A guy named James Sayes did this. Nat King Cole live at the Blue Note Chicago. And it's from 19. What year was that? I just actually have a sheet somewhere here. Oh, it's from 1953. And Nat King Cole had already made it sort of big nationally in Chicago, but the Blue Note's an intimate club. and he has his trio, and he's really playing the piano, and he's really connecting with the audience. And I've heard like a few samples of it, and it's a beautiful package. It's like a double LP set, and it's like limited. Actually, it's not that limited in the sense that it's 4,000 of this double LP and 2,000 of the CD. But I was just going over it, and I actually talked to the engineer, producer who put it together, and it's a great artifact of people might not realize that Nat King Cole. They knew him as kind of a crooner from the old days, but he's a very charismatic performer and an incredible piano player.
Really?
And it's very much a jazz supper club set. And it's like, it's, two LPs. It's all the songs that your parents or your grandparents knew, but like Unforgettable and Mona Lisa. And it's just, so I am excited about some of the jazz titles. I talked to Zeb Feldman, who puts together the jazz. There's a Sun Ra compilation that's really great. And there's Chet Baker and Jack Sheldon singing together, which Jack Sheldon, I grew up with Schoolhouse Rock, and he's the guy who sings Conjunction Junction, but he's also this great jazz singer, So he's Conjunction Junction. Yeah, that's how he sings like that, and Chet Baker, who everyone I think knows. But anyway, so there's a couple of things. Again, on the spot, I don't have the list in front of me. I did make a marking on a list earlier, but it's in the other room.
I do an Excel sheet every year because that's how obsessive I am. Yeah. The big one for me, and the audience knows this, but I'm a big fan and probably the biggest influence on my music that I wrote is G Love. G Love and Special Sauce's first album is 30 years this year, and there's a 30th anniversary Record Store Day release, and I'm super excited for that.
I remember when that came out. I remember they were on Conan. That's how long ago it was. They were on the original Conan show. So yeah. And I remember it because I was in a hotel room. I know where I was. It was like, believe it or not, I hope I haven't got this wrong. I was in Antigonish, Nova Scotia with my band, the Gravelberries. And we watched Conan, and G Love was on because one of the guys in my band said, it's like glove, right? Glove, G Love, glove. And if I'm not mistaken, was this also the day? I'm going to have to Google this. I think it was the day of the OJ car chase.
Really?
Because I remember we were in a hotel, we had a gig, and there was this car chase that hadn't resolved yet, but we had to go play our gig. And then we come back to this the band house that we're staying in, and we turn the TV on to see what had happened, and it was late, and so we all watched Conan together. It was like That's one of those. But it's weird what you remember, right? And I think actually, here's the funny thing is, I also called my wife, and her friend Linda, who made the Bowl of Globes, had just had her daughter. She had just had a child that day. So it was like all these things were happening on this one day.
That's incredible.
Talk about special sauce.
It's in the sauce. And there's also a Jeff Buckley release, which isn't my favorite Jeff Buckley release, the Jeff Buckley Gary Lewis, but I'm a Jeff Buckley completist, so I need that. And there's this weird thing where those two are seemingly completely different from each other, but there is a video that exists on YouTube of the two of them jamming because they actually knew each other. And it's just G playing guitar and a little harmonica and Jeff kind of freeform singing over top of it. And it's like, that's my Roman Empire right there. That's it. Like,
right. Yeah. That's your Roman Empire.
Yeah.
That's hilarious.
At this time, you want to go through the Jauntlet? These are my questions that I ask every guest that comes
Run
through.
Run the Jauntlet, yeah.
It starts with the one-hit wonders. First one, who do you prefer, Billy Joel or Elton John?
I'm going to have to say Elton John. Mm-hmm. Just, do I have to explain it?
You can if you want, but
I would say this. My feeling is that Elton John created the ground with which Billy Joel could have a career.
Okay.
And I respect the man. I respect Billy Joel a lot more now, but at the time when Billy came out, I was like, good, he's good, pretty good. But Elton John, I mean, again, much respect to Billy Joel, but I saw Elton John on his farewell tour when it hit Oakland. This is before the lockdown, and I hands down it's the best $300 ticket I've ever spent in my life, and I don't do that often. So usually the standards are incredibly high if you spent that much money, because it's basically like us, spending 2 hotel nights to go, 2 nights at a hotel. Well, even though it was in town, but it's the equivalent of going to New York City, and it was just hit after hit, like And then, the couple of low moments for me, I don't really love I'm Still Standing, but, what are you going to do?
I need a record store day release. Now I'm going to put out requests while I'm here. I also need a record store day release of Songs from the West Coast, which I feel like is one of his most underrated albums. But what I wanted to mention on this one is, and this goes back to that research thing, I seem to think I heard you once say that Billy Joel is overrated on a podcast.
No, here's what I said. I said I was kind of amazed that he used to be the critical whipping boy. And I was kind of amazed when I discovered that there's a whole generation, it seems. I don't know if it's along generational lines, but there seemed to be, or maybe it's in America or something, but people would refer to, they'd be like talking about concerts and they say, oh, the greats like Bob Dylan or Billy Joel. I'm like, what? Or Elvis Costello, not as much as Billy Joel, but Elvis Costello to me is like, he's my Bob Dylan,
Yeah.
So I think what you might have heard was my shock at how critically acclaimed he is, because I always knew that he was commercially acclaimed, but
Gotcha.
there was and it's sort of the same thing happened when Fleetwood Mac's Rumors became suddenly this critically acclaimed thing. Because I remember when it was the whipping boy and the excuse for punk rock,
Yeah.
So I don't know. And again, all these things, as you get older and as we realize what a good record actually is, I threw out all these stupid biases and rock orthodoxies that I used to hold dear. And now it's just, does this move me right now? And if it does, I don't care if it's, Mbop by Hanson. I mean, that's a great record,
Yeah, 100%. Next one, Debbie Harry or Joan Jett?
Well, I saw this question and I will say I hate you. Because why would you want to pit those two people against each other? If I had to, I'm going to go again with the originals. Joan Jett was a good artist, but in terms of and she's certainly in many ways more rock and roll. But if we were talking about that, Debbie Harry created a genre called Debbie Harry, and Chris Stein and Debbie Harry together doing Blondie. It defies categorization. Blondie is a disco band, a power pop band, a ballad band. There are all these things. And Debbie Harry created a thing where, she was drop dead gorgeous, but the attitude, she had such attitude. She had swagger. Like, no disrespect to Madonna, but the idea of being a so-called pretty blonde with attitude for days, Debbie Harry.
Yeah.
Debbie Harry is just a source musician. Like there's a template there. So Debbie Harry.
I like it. I'm going to throw this out because you mentioned them earlier, but Billie Eilish and Phineas, this is my pitch this season that I've been throwing everywhere, should do a remake of the Joan Jett, Michael J. Fox Light of Day.
They actually be in the movie?
Yeah. They should play the brother and sister.
That. Yeah. Right? I could see that totally.
Yeah.
I think they should re-record the Carpenters. I think because they are today's Carpenters.
It's
in
true.
the sense of brother and sister, and and they've only just begun. So maybe so it'd be perfect. Really, I like your idea. Light of Day. It's too bad. Yeah. Is Paul Schrader still alive?
I think so. Yeah.
Okay. Well, anyway, it's a good idea.
Next one: Aretha Franklin or Tina Turner?
Now I've mentioned that I hate you. So. Again, I'm going to say, oh my God, I had Ann Powers on after Tina died. We talked about Tina and just how much she represented in terms of pure rock and roll, teaching the boys how to do it, surviving, Ike. And at the same time, if you've ever seen that video, that film of Aretha Franklin in the LA church, came out a few years ago, it is Aretha Franklin. I'm just going to give it to Aretha Franklin. Aretha Franklin, I have never seen a performance of Aretha Franklin, even in the Blues Brothers movie, which I just watched the other day. Aretha Franklin is pure soul. And she is a powerful vocalist, incredible pianist, like all gospel, but also earthy. Like just Aretha Franklin. I'm sorry to Tina. It's a shame you've pitted these two against each other, because in a perfect world, they'd come together and ride in the sidecar with me.
In the timeliness, I didn't actually pit them against each other. Beyonce did. And it's because she referred to Tina Turner at an awards show as the Queen, and supposedly Aretha Franklin got upset about that. So,
and if anyone was going to get upset, it would be Aretha Franklin.
That's
for
right.
sure.
Yeah. Next one, Nirvana or Pearl Jam?
I'm going to surprise some people by saying Nirvana, because this goes back to my power pop thing. I feel like that Kurt Cobain is much more appreciative of pop song structure than Pearl Jam, which, again, no disrespect to Pearl Jam, and I certainly understand their appeal, but there's a certain tendency in some ends of the so-called grunge movement to go, yeah, and be that kind of singer. And certainly not as much as Stone Temple Pilots, but an Eddie Vedder, pure folk singer and can sing rock, and the band are all like sharpshooters in a Zeppelin model. They're much more like Stillwater from Almost Famous.
Almost Famous, yeah.
But at the same time, Nirvana was a power pop band at times, or at least a pop band, and they understood. Yeah, Kurt just had a melodic sensibility and knew some. And then you got like when Grohl, the most famous stuff with Grohl, like that was the template there. And then no Foo Fighters without that. So I think it's going to be Nirvana.
All right, I like it. Janis Joplin or Stevie Nicks?
Well, this one's easier because you have to qualify because they're different singers.
Yes.
Like Janis is pure fire. Janis singing "Come On" or "Piece of My Heart," like she is. I'm going to say Janis just because I have such respect for Stevie Nicks. Again, these questions just leave me mad because Stevie Nicks is a great original vocalist and a very fine songwriter, and certainly blending with Christine McVie and Lindsey Buckingham, there's a sound that you pick out immediately. But Janis Joplin, come on, it's like comparing a freight train to a really smart car, like Janis Joplin.
I love it. I love it. The big cliche, Beatles or the Stones, and I'm pretty sure I know the answer to this one.
Well, do you know this? I'm going to say the Beatles. I think you know that.
Yeah, that was a shock.
But I have always had a deep and abiding respect for the Rolling Stones, and I certainly understand why. And I certainly understand why people love them, and I too love them. Famously to me, my friend Bill Janovitz from Buffalo Tom not only has written about the Stones, but he represented them in a debate I had on WNYC with Ophira Eisenberg and Bill Janovitz were representing the Stones. My brother Mike and me were representing the Beatles, and we did this live debate. And I would honestly say that we won the debate on points, but it was a really good match. And I feel like the whole Beatles versus Stone thing is such again, why would you do that? I mean, even the Beatles and the Stones themselves were pals. Like, it's
right.
not, it's like such a small world. Like they're the only two bands that know about everything about each other that way. So, but I say the Beatles just on sheer songwriting variety, and you had so many writers in that band, and just such diversity of sound and the impact. I mean, the Beatles changed everything. The Beatles even changed the Stones,
Yeah.
Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like the Stones changed their trajectory when they started like working with the Beatles, "I Want to Be Your Man," etc., and then learning how to write their own songs. Satanic Majesty's Request clearly has some kind of nod to Sgt. Pepper. It's like, so to me, it's Beatles.
It makes sense. It makes sense. The last one of the top 10 countdown, and it's very interesting asking you this because I feel like it's kind of somewhat, I feel like you actually might kind of play a part in the creation of this, but Bohemian Rhapsody or Stairway to Heaven, and I can explain that if you need me to explain why I think you're responsible for this question.
Well, it's funny. I think you're alluding to the fact that my brother Mike Myers, the comedian and writer of the movie Wayne's World, he put a Bohemian Rhapsody in the car scene in Wayne's World. Now, I will say this. You might know this because you did research that is based on something that happened to me. My band used to travel in it wasn't a Pacer, it was a Dodge Dart. A Dart Swinger. Sorry, that was the name of the model. The car was called a Swinger. And my friend Michael Philip Voivoda, who's now a talented record producer and filmmaker in Toronto, he and I used to sing along to the radio. And we would find the harmonies in the records. So we would always sing along. And Bohemian Rhapsody was one of the many songs that we used to sing along to. A couple others were like Old Black Water by the Doobie Brothers.
Yeah.
Anything with massive harmonies in it, we would just find a part and sing. And that was kind of a great training for us. And I used to drum on the dashboard with Mike's drums. Michael was a drummer, Michael Voivoda. So I would take his drumsticks and ruin his dashboard. And so it was very participatory. And my younger brother Mike was in the car once and just like loved that we had this thing that was called the band was called Space Invaders, and we called it the Space Invader Mobile. And so that is, but the other joke in Wayne's World I'm also indirectly responsible for is we used to go to Long McQuaid's guitar shop, and I would often work out Stairway to Heaven. And a lot of people did. And there's a point where the store was getting so annoyed, and I said something to the effect of, I'm surprised they don't have a sign that says no playing Stairway to Heaven. That became kind of a family joke. I'm not saying Mike stole it. In fact, he called me and said, I'm thinking of using that in the movie. And now it's become lore of its own, no stairway. And you see there's videos on YouTube of people in music stores acting out the scene. So in a weird way, the whole question of Stairway versus Bohemian relates to my childhood. Yeah. So, and having answered that question, Stairway was a huge, important song for me as a kid. But I gotta say, you're asking me in 2024, Bohemian Rhapsody is a genius arrangement and production. And maybe I'm in the mood where I'm talking about things that changed the course of history. Stairway to Heaven changed the course of history too. I mean, you wouldn't have a Bohemian Rhapsody probably without Stairway to Heaven, because the idea of a long episodic song that rocks out at the end is Stairway. I mean, it's also maybe like Dream On too. Like, I don't know. There's by Aerosmith, but I would say I'm actually talking myself out of this. Bohemian Rhapsody by a hair.
Okay.
But it's again, it's really hard to do this. You can't, this is a fool's errand.
It's brilliant. It's brilliant. That's so awesome. I'm going to throw one in here on the fly, specifically for you, and it's because of the Gravelberries, and that is the Eep Op or means I love you, or open up your heart and let the sunshine in. Wow.
Now you've left out Do the Twitch.
Ah, yes.
Is that, no, how's it go? Yeah. The one was, what was his name? The pop star. But anyway, okay. I would say Let the Sunshine In, because, and that thing changed the world, man.
Yeah.
Like, without that song, no Monterey Pop, because when Pebbles and Bam Bam appeared at Monterey Pop, that meant the Mamas and the Papas could be there, and Hendrix, it opened the door.
Oh, that's great. It's so great. Like that's one of my favorite things in the world is the music of cartoons and TV shows, because and it's probably comes from that power pop thing. But like there were just incredible songs and incredible songwriters working for things that are seemingly throwaway scenes. I think my appreciation of jazz comes from Tom and Jerry. Like a lot of that stuff.
Yeah. And Bugs Bunny.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, my dad used to joke, it was a big influence on me and my brothers, Peter and Mike, that we never noticed the cartoon sound effects and music when we were really young. But my dad would say, hear that flute player, or hear that bongo player. I'm like, there's a whole other world going on in this cartoon. Yeah. And then we started noticing sound effects too. But my dad used to say, like, the TV show Mission Impossible and had that open with his bongos. And he goes, I played the bongos on that, which was like, it became one of those dad jokes that we just didn't even hear the joke anymore when he said it, like, because he'd say it every time. But then to realize that a human being, this is what happened later. I went, human being made that.
Yeah.
It's just like when you start to notice all the other jobs in movies, you go, like, you see a movie and you see the camera come down on a crane behind or a drone camera or whatever. And you go, now I watch movies and I go, wow, that must have been, you can't see the crew, so they must have had them all on a remote location, and they must have had just one camera coming in here because they do 360 and you don't see the crew, or maybe they're CGing it out. Like, I never used to think about those things. And in a weird way, I kind of hate that I can't watch a movie now without thinking of the sound mix. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, it's great to respect the good people who make these things.
For me. Yeah. For me, that was always Foley work. Like, Foley work just blows my mind especially when you can't recognize it, and then like you see a clip of like the dailies and stuff, and you're like, oh my God, none of that existed. Like, someone sat there in a box.
I was always blown away by the idea of room. They record room tones so that they have the sound of the room without anyone in it. And so you might hear like an air conditioner distant, and even that, they don't necessarily always record those. And then the idea of additional dialogue, ADR. Yeah. Like the idea that someone's walking down a street And rather than have mics on them, they would just have them say the lines, and then later they'd add them in, and then they'd have to add street sounds. So, and because they didn't have any what they call wild sound. So the idea of ADR just blew my mind, or the fact that you could change a line of dialogue in post-production. It's like you could have them like cut away to someone else's face, so the word that they forgot to say or they need to say, like meanwhile I'm giving him the gun tomorrow, which is like a big plot point, and so that they forgot to shoot a line where the guy says that, so or they haven't thought of that, and then they go, we need to have someone say that, but we can't shoot the whole film, so then they have the voice thrown in. Like that to me is amazing.
It's wild. There's a clip, I don't know if you've ever seen it, that Criterion put out of them just recording room tone on all of their interviews, and it's just people sitting there while the room tone's being recorded. It's really fun to watch.
I've been on I was on the set for a few movies, and I was always the guy that meant they had to start again, because I go, what are they doing now? Well, why is no one talking? So I'm sure there's a sound reel guy who's got like hours and hours of Paul Myers interruptions.
That's awesome.
No, I learned pretty fast.
The next section is the top 10 countdown. We talked about it a little bit before, but Jawn can mean whatever you want it to mean at any point in time, any person, place, or thing, or idea. Number 1 is the first Jawn. What were you first obsessed with when you were a kid?
Probably the Beatles.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was very, very young when I saw either A Hard Day's Night or a video of the Beatles at Shea that was on TV, Beatles at Shea Stadium. And then the Beatles cartoons, and just the idea that there was a guy, my initials, my name is Paul M. So there was a Paul McCartney, and I would just like, there's a Paul in that band. I'm named Paul. Kind of the reason I wanted to get a guitar, because the tennis racket just wasn't cutting it. And hockey stick in my case as well. Just like I was obsessed with the Beatles from a very young age, and I suppose that hasn't changed.
Yeah, I dig it. Number 2, what's your current Jawn? What are you into right now?
Oh man, that's really tough. I'm into a lot of things in terms of music and film, and here's something that's in the last few years I've really gotten into photography. I started out with an earlier model of the iPhone. I suddenly realized, I always liked pictures, but never thought I had the patience to be a photographer. And then I started framing things, and I realized that I knew where I wanted things to be in the frame. I knew how I wanted it to look. And then Instagram came along, and I thought, oh, that's a place you can just sort of show your photographs, right? That's kind of like having a daily gallery. Instead of saying words, you're just showing visions with things that you saw. And how do I put this? I don't want to give myself a compliment, but I have an kind of an eye. I have an eye. It's whether it's a good or bad eye, I don't know. People have said they dig it, and that's really, really good. But I mean, I don't know. I can't compare myself to the great photographers, but it gives me a lot of satisfaction to make a photograph. And so I would say that is my current Jawn, if you're using that terminology. That's photography, and I've really gotten deep into it. And I can't afford super equipment, but I have a pretty good Sony A7 III that is, it's a good full frame camera, and I've used other cameras, but it's just, if I have any money at any point, I will probably buy some bigger lenses, because I feel like that's something that I would get a lot of hours of use out of.
That's awesome. I just I shot a concert. I got a photo pass and shot a concert recently, and it was my first time kind of shooting something, and it didn't turn out well because it was a very weirdly lit room. But but it definitely scratched an itch that I didn't know needed scratching, and so now I'm that's like something I'm kind of looking at doing some more of myself.
Oh, it's weird. Because I wrote the Todd Rundgren book, I've had access to some Todd Rundgren shows. And in Napa a few years ago, I asked if I could bring my Sony camera. I don't know if I don't think they didn't even have a rule about it at that show. And I had like a fairly good telephoto lens, and I got photographs that I was using the automatic levels, so the light was okay. And I was kind of amazed that I got those shots that you see people take at concerts, photographers. And I realized, so really all that's stopping me from doing concert photography would be constantly practicing at it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm sort of an acquaintance of the English photographer Chalky Davies. And he told me that the reason he got into photography was back in the 70s. He wanted to get into a show and thought if he, brought his camera, it would give him access to the photo pit. and it was in the Wild West days of rock and roll. And that show was David Bowie at the Hammersmith, I think the Hammersmith Palais or Odeon, and he sold the shots to the I think the NME, and then he was a professional photographer.
That's
So next,
incredible.
cut to him on tour with Thin Lizzy. So
Oh, God.
that's I don't know if those careers are still havable. And then there's someone like Lynn Goldsmith, who is like a genius artist who would be an artist at anything, but she's also an incredible photographer. She makes pictures, that's the term, not just takes them, she makes them.
She makes them. That's beautiful. It's a good segue. Here is number 3. What was your first live show you saw?
Oh, well, I just talked about this recently. It's a Canadian band you've probably never heard of called the Stampeders.
I have not.
Okay, the Stampeders were a 3-piece rock band originally from Calgary, Canada, and where they have the Calgary Stampede, which is a big sort of rodeo and other thing event. It's like a state fair type thing, except it's Canada. And the Stampeders were on the charts when I was a kid, and they were one of the first Canadian rock bands to have charts in Canada, have chart hits in Canada. And there's a song of theirs that does travel called "Sweet City Woman." You'll hear it on oldies channels sometimes. It's like a banjo. It's a very jolly little song, and they were so influential to me because they were making it from Canada, and I was in Canada. So there's an outdoor festival series similar to a winery today, but it's a place called Ontario Place. Ontario is the province I grew up in. Ontario Place was kind of an amphitheater summer concert series, and I think I just researched this. I think I was very young. Let's just say that. I think I was probably, I can't remember what age, but I was in like 10 or 12 or something. And my mother took me to this show. It was an early evening show, and it was the first time I'd ever seen a band live. First time I ever saw like curly guitar chords, people with amplifiers, colored gels on the lights. Like, so there was red and green lights, which is like an incredible, if you've never seen that before, you've only heard records on the radio and maybe seen TV shows, but to hear the sound of an audience around you, and it was a rotating stage. So it was that kind of a bonus, was like the stage did like a 360 rotation during the show. It was a great entree into rock and roll. So that was my very first concert I ever saw.
It's awesome. Number 4, what was the last show you went to?
I'm trying to remember. I think it was Robin Hitchcock at the Chapel. I can't believe it's the last show I saw though, because I feel like I saw something recently. The loudest show I saw recently was in November. I saw Devo,
Wow.
and it was great. It was better than I could have imagined. I think I'd never seen them before, and they're on a kind of a victory lap tours now, and it's just hit after hit, and the visuals are still stunning, but loud as hell, like just really rocking out and insistent and visceral, and But Robin Hitchcock was doing when I saw him, it was at the Chapel, and it was like Chapel is a very smallish nightclub, and good sound, one of my favorite places in the city. And it was on Syd Barrett's birthday, and if you know anything about Robin Hitchcock, he's kind of a descendant emotionally of Syd Barrett, sort of surreal, evocative, equally John Lennon and Bob Dylan, and just surreal and psychedelic, and so it was a respectful tribute to Syd Barrett, where he was playing all the songs of Syd Barrett that he could play, basically, and that was great. I can't believe that's the last show though. I haven't really put it together, but that's definitely of this last swing for sure.
I dig it. Number 5, what was your favorite concert? Best live show you ever saw?
Well, this is funny because it wasn't a public concert, but I saw, I was lucky to go to Saturday Night Live in 1993 to see Paul McCartney. And I was 6 feet away from him on the main floor when he sang "Hey Jude."
Jesus Christ.
And I looked around, and there's some people had shown up for it. Bill Murray was standing by the cameras, and John Bon Jovi was tearing up, and Sting and Trudy Styler were there. It was like we realized this was the place to be. It was like this moment. It was, and that was through the fortitude of me having a family connection to get in. But that was so amazing. But in terms of actual concert, I think I told you this earlier. One year I spent on 2 different concert tickets. I spent money that I've never spent before because I'm broke most of the time as well as being cheap, but mostly because I'm broke. I went to see Elton John on the Farewell Yellow Brick Road tour and had hoped it would be good, but had no idea that it would be so good. Like, so respectful of his fans. The band was perfect. Like, Davy Johnston's still in the band, and Nigel Olson's still in the band, and then other people, younger people as well, bolstering the sound. So you could really and Elton himself singing in fine voice, playing piano like a guy who loves to play the piano rather than an obligation. And the visuals were nice, and there were screens so you could see up close, but really, even from the back, I was kind of at the back but raised, so I could see the audience below me, and it was so great, hit after hit. And Rocket Man, and but I will say the other big concert I saw at the same venue that I spent money on that also surprised me how much I loved it, only in that I didn't expect to ever see them, was Jeff Lynne's Electric Light Orchestra. They had 17 people on stage recreating those multiply overdubbed records, but Jeff was so into being there, his sweet little Birmingham self, oh, can't believe you like our little band, and like, it was just really, you have no idea. You're not prepared for how much you love a song like Telephone Line or Mr. Blue Sky with the complete sound. Like, the strings are there, everything's there, and it's all real. Like, it's all being played on stage, and it's just, and where Jeff can't maybe sing some of the high notes he used to sing, he has a guy in the backing section that's sort of shadowing him, so he can sing all the sort of Dylan-y parts of his voice because he has a very Dylan-esque voice. And then when it gets into some of the bigger, sort of higher parts, he's singing, but really hitting a harmony while the other guy's singing. But it just gives you the illusion of, but it's not just an illusion like they're acting. They're making this music come alive. And what more can you ask for from a legacy artist, I think,
For real. It's kind of similar, especially with the, someone taking parts in the background was, I got to see, during one of the non-com conventions that they hold, in Philly, I got to see Brian Wilson, and I was right up against the stage, and it was, 2015, maybe something like that. Right. And like, just sitting there during God Only Knows, with him right there, like it was kind of, on a smaller scale, I didn't look over and see Bill Murray or anything like that, but that would have been, I
think that would have been Jeffrey Foskett singing the high notes, right? I think at that
think so. Yeah.
Those guys, what Darian Sahanaja did, and all those guys, what the Wondermints guys did is they made it viable for someone like Brian Wilson, who, wasn't really in shape to be on stage in terms of his earlier days. And even in the old days, he was a reluctant performer, I think, and I say this as a guy who has everything that Brian Wilson ever did. And I've dissected and listened to all of his greatest work, even the surf stuff. And I love Brian Wilson, and I have nothing but admiration and respect, especially at this hour when he lost his wife and his own health is failing. But having a bunch of people up there who also love him, the shelter that they give him, the jacket that they make for him to keep him warm on stage, it's so beautiful. And I know I'm a social media acquaintance with Jim Lespia, the drummer. I can't even say his last name. Jim, the drummer from that band. And by the way, I know some of the guys who played with the Monkees too. And it's like, it's always neat when these people who are sometimes they're not that young themselves, but they're much younger than the artist they're playing with. I knew Denny Lane's band before he passed away, and Joey Molland of Badfinger was touring with some friends of mine as well. So actually, the same people, and it's just I love what these people do because they create a safe environment to fill in the gaps that time has left in some of them. And Denny Lane, by the way, was still kicking it up until he got sick. Like he did. I have to brag. Because these guys are friends of mine, they had me up on stage to play acoustic guitar on Band on the Run, which is Denny was in Wings at that era. And, what a trip, right? And afterwards I'm talking to Denny and just, asking him about different songs. And, he co-wrote Mull of Kintyre. People don't realize he actually co-wrote Mull of Kintyre. And, he would do Go Now, the Moody Blues song he wrote. And, and that was great. And the other thing these guys did, and again, I'm going to name drop again, is when Joey Mullen came to town, I got to play guitar on the Day After Day, the Badfinger song, and again on stage at the chapel, which I mentioned, and it like. They, before we're working it out in the dressing room and they have the guitar there. It's a 12-string guitar. And I got to play. So I got to play a Badfinger song with Joey Mullen and a Wings song with Denny Lane because of these guys who are like this incredible backing band that are friends of mine, So I've had a really charmed life in some ways. I'm not rich or anything, but I've had a lot of great experiences.
Hell yeah. You're living the dream.
I would say I'm living the dream. I'm paid adequately.
Number 6, who have you never seen live that you wish you would have?
Prince.
Same.
Yeah, I had 2 chances to see Prince in the last few years of his life. One was a big funky concert that he was doing, I think in Oakland, and I just didn't have the money and didn't feel like trying to get a favor. And then he did that solo piano tour, and I could have seen that too. And again, I think I didn't know when it was going on sale, and I heard about it when it's too late. And I didn't make an effort. And I thought, one day I'm going to get it together to see Prince, and then he died so tragically on the heels of Bowie going, at least I got to see Bowie a couple of times. I got to see Bowie in 3 times actually. And there's one of my favorites too. Bowie is
my first 2 concerts were David Bowie concerts. It was the Serious Moonlight tour and the Glass Spider tour. And after seeing the Glass Spider tour at like age 7, I feel like I was ruined for concerts for a very long time because I was like, why is there not a big giant spider? And where's Peter Frampton?
Yeah, a friend of mine when I was a kid, I can't remember what album it was. Might have been the Heroes tour. No, but my friend had bought a ticket for him and his girlfriend, and he broke up with his girlfriend 3 days. Maple Leaf Gardens in Toronto, which was where the Toronto Maple Leafs used to play, and they don't play there anymore. And they had concerts there, obviously, because it's like Madison Square or Boston Garden or something. And he broke up with his girlfriend 3 days before, and he said, "Do you want to come to this show, Paul?" And I said, "Oh, absolutely, I'll come to Bowie with you." And then he made up with his girlfriend the day after. I just recently got caught up with this old friend of mine. Like we've been friends ever since, but I hadn't talked to him in a few years, and I for some reason couldn't like. You remember that time you offered me the Bowie ticket, and then you had to pull out at the last minute? I'm like, dude, that freaked me out that you broke. Why couldn't you make up with her the day after the show?
Right.
Anyway.
It's great. Number 7, name an unappreciated Jawn, something you wish people paid more attention to.
Oh, and any kind of thing?
Any kind of thing.
Oh, geez.
Can I suggest one? Because
okay.
My friend Sean told me that you have interest of making a book on the wrong guy, and please make that happen.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I would. Because the story of the wrong guy, when I interviewed all the principals for it, during the Kids in the Hall book that I wrote, which we didn't mention yet, One Dumb Guy, the Kids in the Hall, and I also executive produced the Canadian Screen Award winning documentary that Reg Harkema directed called Comedy Punks, Kids in the Hall Comedy Punks. So when I was doing all that research, I talked to Dave Foley and Jay Kogan and David Higgins, who wrote The Wrong Guy. And the story of getting that movie made with director David Steinberg, the comedian, was just incredible, including the infighting with the Kids in the Hall about when they were going to make it because they were trying to make Brain Candy around the same time, and Dave wanted to do The Wrong Guy. So yeah, I would, and I just saw it recently at a screening in San Francisco that you might, that's where story came up, and Jennifer Tilly was there, and Jay and David Higgins and Dave Foley, and of course Joe Flaherty was not there, and Joe Flaherty was so good in this movie. There's a great running joke in it. If the listeners haven't heard it, haven't seen it, the one of the premises of the film is that the local farmers trying to foreclose on all the banks and build farms in their places, which is obviously a reversal of the general plot of all of those movies. The farmers are getting closed out by the banks. And and Joe Flaherty's, "I'm just a humble banker. All I know is banking." And then the farmer comes in. He's this evil guy going, your bank by this time tomorrow is just going to be a patch of rutabagas, like, and it's just this whole, I mean, I'm paraphrasing the joke, but it's such a great premise. And also that Dave Foley his character comes from finances, and he lands up, classic with the farmer's daughter thing. And he goes, well, I can't be of any help to you on this farm, sir. And he goes, are you kidding me? You could work at my bank. It's like, what? Like, and Joe Flaherty, so great. And I'm writing a book on John Candy that's sadly not going to come out for about a year or so. Because we decided to wait till the 75th anniversary, 75th birthday of John Candy. So it's coming out in like the end of 2025, which let's hope we're all still alive. But it'll be worth it because I put a lot of work into this. And luckily, I interviewed Joe Flaherty, who is a big part of the John Candy story. I don't know if you know this, but John Candy was auditioning against his will for Second City Toronto, and they sent up two guys from the cast of Chicago were Brian Doyle Murray, Bill Murray's brother, and he was a big guy at Chicago Second City, and Joe Flaherty, who was a big guy at Second City, and he's from Pittsburgh, by the way. Shout out to Pennsylvania. I don't know if that works for Philadelphia people, but anyway. Flaherty at the audition in Toronto said, I like that Candy kid, but he's too young, I think. And then Del Close, the great comedy guru who was in on the audition, said, you know what? You're right. Maybe not now, but let's bring him to Chicago and train him. So he goes down and trains, and he gets in with another rookie, Bill Murray, and the two of them train together at Second City. So Joe Flaherty kind of set that in motion. And then when they were casting the TV show, and they finally made the TV show, by this point, Candy was in Toronto, and it was definitely Flaherty who said, make sure John Candy's part of this TV show, and Second City Television becomes the place where they all prove themselves. And so Joe Flaherty, throughout his career, was the guy who, really, I mean, that's just what he did for John Candy, but he did that for other things too. And, and he's just, and of course, Freaks and Geeks.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, there's just the idea that Paul Feig and Judd Apatow put him in Freaks and Geeks because they knew. They had watched SCTV. They knew. And he played the dad, was it, I knew a guy who smoked. He's dead.
He's dead.
He's dead now.
His deliveries are just perfect.
Yeah.
I mean, like, and his physical work too, like in The Wrong Guy, just him trying to get comfortable in the new chair just kills me every single time.
Yeah. So what's next on the list of questions?
Favorite album?
Oh, geez. It's really tough because it changes all the time. I don't even know if I want to answer that question. I will say the album I've listened to the most in the last 5 years, because I use it for writing. It's an ambient music album. It is the classic Brian Eno, Music for Airports.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. I can hum along with that. Like I know every inflection on it, and it's like a warm bath. That album. It's comforting, or like my English dad used to say, a good cup of tea. It's like it's comforting. It's familiar. It never seems to date for me. I think it's from like 76 or something. I haven't looked at it lately, the actual date, but this is an album from, punk rock was just about to happen when this record came out, and it still sounds, I don't think it's been matched, but there's a few albums I could put on this list, and I hate lists. I hate coming up with best ofs, but Jellyfish Spilt Milk is one that comes to mind. XTC Skylarking is another one. Todd Rundgren's Something Anything. Geez, I don't even, Joni Mitchell's Blue. I mean, come on. Joni Mitchell's Hajira.
Yes.
Okay, so it just, there are albums that I have to listen to the whole album, and there are some that I dabble in, but those are albums that I mentioned that, Revolver by the Beatles. What am I doing forgetting to mention that? It's an evil question.
It is. Number 9, name an artist whose output you'll consume anything they release.
Well, obviously the Beatles, but I would tell you XTC, anything Andy Partridge or XTC. I have everything they've ever released. If Andy Partridge puts something out, or Colin Moulding for that matter, I will put money down on that. And there are a few other artists perhaps, but I know that's an artist that I am a completist for.
I love it. I love it. The 10th and final of the Jauntlet and of the Top 10 Countdown. What is your favorite Jawn of all time? Can be anything you want it to be.
Oh, man. I don't know. I'll say my wife.
Yeah, it's a beautiful answer.
No, I mean, because I'm very lucky, and I'm not just saying this because I don't even know if she'll listen to this, but I'm very lucky that in 1986, the jazz age, the silent era, I met a woman who she wouldn't take my bullshit, but I was happy to drop my bullshit around her. Like I went, oh, wait a minute, now I'm going to get, and we started dating, and, we both had gone to the same Talking Heads show, but we didn't know each other. It was the Stop Making Sense tour, the one that became the movie Stop Making Sense. And then we just started connecting, and she introduced me to the music of Lloyd Cole and the Commotions, and I introduced her to the music of Roddy Frame and Aztec Camera, and we both loved Elvis Costello. And then from there, we started having like a serious relationship, and we got married like actually about 9 years later because we were just living together. And it's exponentially every year we travel together now, and we go places, and just it's like I'm so comfortable. We're so we love each other, but we also like each other. And if anything else in my life goes as well as that, I mean, I'd be surprised. Like I've been lucky. Like I said, I have great experiences in a lot of areas. I managed to make a living, even though I'm not rich. But man, like just so that is perhaps the favorite Jawn of all time is my wife, Lisa.
That's beautiful. I love that. I love to hear that.
It's a sappy answer, but it's a true story.
That's awesome. No need to qualify it. That's beautiful. So if these fine folks that listen to this show would like to check you out, what's the best way to track you down and follow you on the socials?
Well, I guess the photography is at Pull My Ears, which is an anagram of Paul Myers. So it's PULMYEARS on Instagram, which is also my handle on Threads. And for my sins, I am still on Twitter. Liking it a lot less. But I still maintain an account there. I don't update it as much. But so I'm on Threads. I'm on Instagram. That's a good place to find me. Also, at the recordstoreday.com, at recordstoreday.com, they will give you information about the Record Store Day podcast, and then they can messages to me, or, you can find out how to get in touch with me through that. And I would say listen to the Record Store Day podcast wherever you get podcasts. We're now weekly. And Record Store Day is coming up. I don't know when this is airing, but April 20th is Record Store Day in 2024.
I think the Monday before it comes out.
Yeah, there you go. Well, and there's a lot going on. And on the Record Store Day podcast, all this month we've had, and we will continue to have discussions and interviews with people who are putting out releases for Record Store Day. So it's a targeted month of very specific to Record Store Day. And then we go back to our regular, just anyone who makes records that I'm interested in talking to. So
it's awesome. Yeah. It's incredible. And I'll just throw this out there. If you ever want me to come in and co-host, I'm there for you.
That would be funny. That would be, especially from Philly. Yeah,
that's right. Yeah. So if you ever want to talk to G Love and you need someone who knows everything about G Love inside and out, there's
okay. Well, it's a deal. Okay.
I love it. Paul, well, thank you so much for doing this. And thank you for the music, the books, just everything. Like I said, I find you very inspiring, how you stay creative and how not just with your own stuff, but bringing attention to other people's stuff, which I think is absolutely incredibly admirable.
Well, I appreciate you saying so. Thank you very much.
My many thanks again to Paul for joining me on the show today. The Record Store Day podcast is available wherever you get your podcasts from, and you can find more details at recordstoreday.com. You can find Paul's music on his Bandcamp page, paulmyers.bandcamp.com, and his work with John Moorman at thepaulandjohn.bandcamp.com. And of course, you can find Paul on all of the socials at Pull My Ears. That's PULMYEARS. Links to all of those and where you can find Paul's books are, of course, as always, in the show notes. If you haven't done so already, please be sure to subscribe to the Yo That's My Jawn podcast, wherever you get your podcast from. And guys, it is not too late to get yourself a super awesome Jawn Scout Merit Badge for Citizenship of the World just by rating and reviewing us. Don't forget to visit www.yothat'smyjawn.com for the link tree with links to articles, merchandise, all of the previous episodes of this podcast, guest appearances on other podcasts, and more. And while you are there, be sure to sign up for our mailing list to get all of the updates delivered straight into your inbox. Like us on Facebook at facebook.com/YoThat'sMyJawn for updates and live streams. Follow us on Instagram, Threads, and Twitter X at Yo That's My Jawn, and search Yo That's My Jawn on YouTube to find the Yo That's My Jawn YouTube channel. Like and subscribe the heck out of that ish. We want to hear from you. Reach out, and touch some Jawn. Oh yeah, bonus episode in the books. Super stoked for Record Store Day this Saturday. I got a lot on my pull list that I have to get into. And if you can get out there, please do. Visit your local indie record store. Support local. All right, y'all. Blue skies. Until next time, everybody.
That's my Jawn.
Displace the guilt and embrace the pleasure. You taste it, things that don't need to be measured.
Yo, That's My Jawn is a Lonely Monk production. Written and produced by yours truly, Nate Runkle. Theme song by me, under the moniker Nate 3.0. Special thanks to Fox Run Brands, DX Ferris, Andrew Scott, Maggie Poulos, Dan Drago, Natalie Runkle, and the beautifully vibrant and wickedly stunning Katie Daubney. If you or anyone you know has any ideas they would like to share or any guests they would like to hear on the podcast, please feel free to reach out to us at yothat'smyjawn@gmail.com or hit us up on the socials at YoThat'sMyJawn. Until next time, be sure to displace the guilt and embrace the pleasure. Tilt your head back and shout to the world, Yo, that's my Jawn.